Good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for joining the European Context online discussion on the elections in Denmark. Will the Greenland standoff help Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen remain in office? Denmark holds early elections on 24th March, 26th, that is next week. Our speakers are Rune Stubager, political scientist and book author, professor at Aarhus University, an expert on voter behavior, public opinion, and political sociology in Denmark. The second speaker is Jarlner, a journalist and commentator on foreign affairs, a member of the editorial board and tech editor at Politiken, Denmark's largest quality newspaper. He's also a frequent commentator on Danish national television and radio programs, and a contributor to the Washington Post, France 24, and The Atlantic. My name is Mirjana Tomic. I curate and moderate European Context events, and I work for two Vienna-based organizations, Forum Journalismus und Medien, a training institution for professional journalists, and Presseclub Concordia, founded in 1859 and still active in protecting journalists. European Context is generously supported by the Austrian Erste Foundation. The format of the seminar will be the following. For the first 30 minutes, I shall conduct a conversation with our speakers. And the second half hour, the floor or the screen will be open to live questions. And maybe the best thing is you turn on your camera and you ask a question. Just a brief context. As you all know, Denmark is Europe's trendsetter in different policy areas. Its welfare state is very generous, but people are expected to work until the age of 70. It's longer than in any other EU country. Its migration policies have been the strictest in Europe since 2000. Danish Social Democrats have contributed to this trend, and the Social Democrats plan to deport those migrants who have been condemned to 1 year of prison for a crime they have committed. The far-right Danish People's Party suggests that Muslims should be deported from Denmark. The far right has been setting the agenda for migration policy for about 2 decades. Denmark has devised the concept of urban areas denominated as ghettos or parallel societies where the population has non-Western background and special policies apply. While countries like Austria struggle with budget deficits, in Denmark, the Danish finance minister has found extra funds, that is extra money, no deficit, and therefore Copenhagen can finance its defense splurge without undermining welfare benefits. On the same afternoon, when Mette Frederiksen called snap elections, her government issued a one-off cash payment of up to 670 euros to 2 million households. In Poland, when the Peace and Justice Party did something similar, this practice was criticized as a means to buy voters. Last but not least, Danish governments have been loyal supporters of the US foreign policies and participated in its wars. After the Greenland standoff, the situation has changed. These and other topics will be addressed today. So let us start with Rune. What are the main concerns of Danish voters 1 week before the elections? Denmark is rich, migrants cannot enter the country, welfare state functions. It is a relatively egalitarian society where trust and contribution to the welfare system play an important role. So what are the major issues? The screen is yours.
Thank you. I'd say there's 3 major issues in this election. The first one is social inequality. The Social Democrats have opened a campaign with a proposal to introduce a wealth tax on the top 1% most wealthy Danes. this is met with criticism from the right wing, saying that this will stifle innovation and hurt new companies trying to start up. They've also, the Social Democrats, as part of this issue, they've also launched a proposal to diversify the pension system. As you said, we're now scheduled for an increasing pension age, so that I personally, if things pan out the way they seem to be, I would be able to retire probably at an age of 71 or 72. And then the idea would be that it would increase as time would go on for people younger than me. But the Social Democrats are now saying that, well, we should have a more differentiated system so that people who have hard, tiring, physical labor type jobs should be able to retire earlier than people like me. So that's on that agenda. The second issue I would point to is, as you already also highlighted, the immigration issue, where we have, well, as you said, a tradition of a fairly strict immigration policy. It's not exactly true that immigrants can't enter the country. We need, as many other Western countries, we need labor. So there's a pretty large import of people to take up various forms of jobs. But it's difficult for asylum seekers to enter and remain in the country, probably more so than in other countries. But the immigration issue is back on the agenda. It was absent more or less from the 2022 election, but now it's back. And I think the discussion was sort of elevated to the current level by the Danish People's Party, who in the fall started introducing to the Danish debate this concept of remigration. And although they are not wanting, at least officially yet, to deport all Muslims, what they say is their request or their demand to other parties for them to join or support a government is that there should be net migration of Muslims out of Denmark. They have yet to say how they want to assure this and who counts as a Muslim. So it's rather open exactly what this would entail. And I should say also that most of the other parties are fairly skeptical of this. So that was the second issue. The third is actually a classic, you could say, in the sense that it's pollution of the drinking water, with leftovers from pesticides used on the fields by farmers, and also by nitrate that seeps into the drinking water through the use of animal manure, mostly on the fields also by the farmers. And a lot of this manure comes from the pig industry. We have one of the largest pig industries in Denmark. I think Denmark has the world record for the number of pigs per capita. So this is a large industry in Denmark, and most of it by far is exported. So if you limit the amount of manure that can be spread in the fields, then it will have repercussions pretty quickly also for the number of pigs that can be produced, and therefore also economic consequences. There's debate about exactly what these consequences will be, but and how large they will be. Many people may have an exaggerated expectation or picture of exactly how important this business is, but still that's a debate going on. So these would be the three main issues, I'd say, in the campaign so far.
Can you just briefly explain, speaking of the three issues, what are the main policy suggestions? I understand, for example, when it comes to agriculture, that there will be, or it's already introduced, a carbon tax for farmers. But could you explain what are the main suggestions regarding migration? What are the main suggestions regarding pensions and agriculture? Because Denmark is an export-oriented industry, and to what extent, at this point, during the war in the Gulf, are Danish exports affected?
Well, if we start with the latter part, I haven't heard any stories, but then this is not an area that I follow that closely, but I haven't heard any stories of Danish exports being threatened. It's more that we, like most other countries, suffer the impact of the rising prices for petrol, diesel, and also various forms of gas. So even though Denmark is a net producer of oil through our oil fields in the North Sea, of course we also suffer from the increasing prices. I haven't heard that exports should suffer yet. We do export some goods, dairy goods, for instance, to the countries in the Middle East. But I think, I mean, there may be other ways of getting that through to the Gulf countries. It's probably easier to transport cheese over land than it is to transport huge amounts of oil. So in that sense, that's not, at least so far, the main implication for the Danish economy of the war in Iran. As for the specific proposals then in the area of agriculture, well, it ranges from the greenest party, if you will, the alternative, saying that they want to limit production of pigs in Denmark so that we should only produce the number of pigs that we can eat ourselves, which would be a dramatic reduction. Other parties are proposing that we should only produce the amount of pigs that we can also process. That is, that we can bring to our own abattoirs and process and turn into meat products that we can sell. Because what is actually the case currently is that Danish farmers are very good at producing piglets. They have a very strong breeding program so that they produce a lot of piglets per sow, and they are exporting these alive to other European countries. But that means that the farming industry is very, at least in this area, very intensive in terms of producing high numbers of animals that are then also sold. And some are saying, well, we shouldn't sell these live animals. We should keep them in the country, feed them, and then kill them and sell the meat, which is sort of the traditional business model in that area. So these are the discussions. Then there's various discussions for proposing for limiting the use of pesticides so that the residue won't seep into the drinking water. And there's also discussions of how to limit the use of manure. We should say, though, that there is already a pretty far-ranging agreement in place that over the coming years is at least intended to, and I think also funded to, take out pretty large shares of the farming land in the country from direct farming and turning it into woodlands or wet areas. Denmark, compared to most other European countries, is extremely highly intensively cultivated, so that we use vast amounts of the surface of the land, if you will, for farming, much more so than in other countries, because we don't have mountain areas and we don't have too many large forests. So we leave a high carbon imprint in that sense. And there is this agreement in place that's intended to take out farming land and turn it into nature of some form. So that is already in place in order to deal with the CO2 side of it, but it's not directly geared towards the issue of pollution of the drinking water. This may be now included, but that remains to be seen. Sorry?
And now I wanted to ask you about the concrete measures in when it comes to migration, before we go on also to foreign policy.
Yeah, they are much more, I would say at this stage at least, unclear. The Social Democrats have launched a proposal containing 18 specific points as part of their campaign to tighten immigration regulations and do other things in that area. Most of them are not really that new nor very concrete. The one proposal that got the most attention was that they said that they wanted to introduce a rule that would affect everybody in the country, Danish citizens and non-citizens alike, so that if you threaten or commit violence against personnel in the healthcare sector, you would be banned from the right that everybody has otherwise to free healthcare, except in emergency cases. And they explicitly said when launching this proposal that they expected this to primarily affect people from, well, as they said, the greater Middle East, because they think that these people from this, with this background, are overrepresented in the statistics of who makes these threats or commits this form of violence. This has attracted widespread criticism from people in the healthcare sector, saying this is not how they perceive nor want to operate. But that's the main, the clearest proposal, at least I would say, from their side. As I said, we've yet to see exactly what it is that the Danish People's Party is proposing, how they want to achieve this idea of net migration of Muslims out of the country. In the fall, they were perhaps more clear in the sense that they said that it should be made almost impossible to live in an Islamist or Islamic. They sometimes waffle a little bit between these two. Islamic way in Denmark, so that Muslims would be incentivized to leave the country. And if that didn't work, then they would put people in prisons where conditions should be worse than in normal Danish prisons. That they said in early November, but that created quite a bit of an outroar. So actually they backtracked on that, and they have not, at least to my knowledge, yet in the campaign been very specific on exactly how they want to make sure that they can achieve this goal. So it's rather unclear yet.
Just one more question, and then we go to foreign policy, and that is about the welfare state and left-wing policies. I understand that the Social Democrats lost the elections in Copenhagen, and it was the first time they are not governing the city in 100 years. And it is because they moved to the right. So now the Prime Minister tries to move to the left again and probably win the elections, or at least run the future government if possible. Could you just explain what is it that she did that is too far to the right, and what is she trying to do now to the left? Just briefly, because the time runs really fast.
Yes, I know. Well, I think a lot of her core voters were disappointed over what happened after the 2022 election when she formed the current centrist government. They didn't really, well, they liked in general the idea of a centrist government, but they haven't liked all the policies that have come from it. In particular, they haven't liked the scrapping of a national holiday, which was one of the first things the government introduced after taking office. The argument was that we need to work more in order to pay for rearming the Danish armed forces. But that has been undercut by, as you said, the Minister of Finance continuously finding more and more money available in the future. So, and then also the Social Democrats, as part of the government, have been party to reducing taxes on high incomes. So many of their core voters have simply disliked what they perceive as two right-wing policies on the economy. Not, mind you, on immigration, because that's not, in my view, what they're losing voters over. But now what they're trying in the campaign with this idea of a wealth tax and this differentiated pension system is exactly to woo back some of these voters. At least that's how I see it, because these policies are clearly more left-wing, more redistributional than what they've been doing for the past 3-4 years. So they are offering to these dissatisfied left-wing voters more left-wing economic policies, basically, hoping to get them back. So far, I should say, it does not look as if it's working. They're pretty stable in the polls. They're doing better than early January, but that was because of the popularity boost that the government got right after the discussions over Greenland, which of course they've maintained that in the polls, which you could say is also an achievement, because now the agenda is distinctly on domestic issues. But other than that, polls are pretty stable. Nothing much is really happening in the campaign. So in that sense, this tactic of now then introducing these more left-wing policies does not really seem to be working at the level of voters, but still it's probably most likely that Mette Frederiksen will continue as Prime Minister after the election. So in that sense, she may still end up with the big prize.
Thank you so much. And there will be time for questions now. Michael, let's go to foreign policy. But before we go to foreign policy, Greenland, Danish policy towards Ukraine or Iran, I just want you to tell your personal story where you explained to me in the conversation we had prior to this talk an anecdote regarding your father and the welfare system. Because from what I understand, one of the Danish arguments against migration is that migrants take profit from the welfare state while they do not contribute. And it is a Danish philosophy and dignity to contribute and return to the welfare. Could you just briefly say the example of your father, which I thought was so illustrative?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I don't know how representative he was for entire Denmark, but you're absolutely right that in order to understand what is going on in the Nordic countries, you have to understand the Nordic welfare system, that you contribute as long as you can and you receive when it is necessary. So that is built into it. And in my father's case, he was an extremist in that regard because he got very sick at one point and needed some social welfare at the time. But he was so eager to pay it all back. So he ended up by finding a solution. It was actually very difficult to be able to pay back what you received. And I don't know how he did it. I was a kid. But he always told me that he paid everything back in some way or the other.
Yes, it is a very specific philosophy. I cannot think of too many people who receive welfare benefits who are eager to pay back. But let's come to foreign policy. I do understand that at this moment, foreign policy is not one of the main election issues. On the other hand, the Prime Minister has been very active in foreign affairs, and sometimes one has the feeling from abroad that Denmark punches above its waist, and this money that has been found allows Denmark to splurge on defense spending. So let's start with Greenland and the main policies. Can you just give us the framework? Denmark has stood behind Ukraine, has been very vociferous against Russia, but I have not heard what is Danish stand towards the United States and Israel bombing Iran at this moment. What is their policy? Could you just give us an overview on what the current government believes in?
First of all, I think it's important to understand this is on top of mind in most Danish voters' mind. But the reason we do not debate it too much is that the big majority do agree on the main points in what is going on. We are firmly standing behind Ukraine. We try to avoid pushing away USA. At the same time, we are caught in this trap that Donald Trump wants part of the kingdom, Greenland. And then we have introduced this concept of pragmatic idealism, which has actually been the guiding light for Danish foreign policy. And that is a concept opposed to idealism. So it's about saying, hey, world is actually changing. We are living in a world with more centers, and we do face at least a world with more power centers. So we have to act in another way than we could do before. If I should move back from your question, I mean, when it comes to Iran, Denmark is actually here revealing what it means by pragmatism, because our foreign minister said we have to act in a pragmatic way. It's not like Denmark cannot be part of a war which is judged illegal and certainly without any plans. There was a French general 2 days ago, Yakolev. He was actually comparing the war or Trump's question for us being part of it. He likened that to the captain on Titanic inviting to a dance party and the access to cheap tickets after the Titanic had hit the iceberg. So this is also how we see it. But at the same time, we need NATO and we need USA support in Ukraine. So there's absolutely no idea in pushing USA more back than we need to. So this is why they're talking about, could we find a pragmatic solution where we could contribute to removing mines in the Hormuz Strait after a peace negotiation or whatever it would be, but without dragging Europe and Denmark into a new war, which we are absolutely not interested in. And we were actually not invited to even be part of the planning. So this is a big thing. And behind this is a very clear priority in Denmark. One priority is, hitherto we have been firmly behind Ukraine. Our Prime Minister has been very tough on that, but with a very broad support in Denmark. We are now approaching 3.5% in defense expenditures of GNP, which is a new thing. I mean, we came from a point where we did not want to contribute too much to any war. We are now even discussing if we could be part of a nuclear weapons program in Europe. So we have really moved, and this is because we consider what is going on in Ukraine not only as Ukraine's war, but also a defense of our own values. So the front line is actually in Ukraine, but the war is all of ours. So that is the main priority. And of course, we also have a priority in keeping the kingdom as a unity. I mean, it's crazy to see how USA is actually, or Donald Trump is demanding a part of Denmark. Remember here.
Let me just one question. The Prime Minister and most Danish politicians from Greenland and, let's say, mainland Denmark said that there is a red line. What exactly is the red line, and what exactly are they ready to do? It is not clear to me.
It's not clear to us what really Donald Trump wants to. Because if you go back in time, you have, since 1951, we had an agreement with USA that they have full access to military bases. The defense agreement from 51 was that USA would contribute in the NATO defense of Greenland, and they would have access all over Greenland. And for a very long period, USA had I think they had 27 bases in Greenland. And then they started to close them down. This is the American priority during the Cold War, that they started to actually, or after the fall of the wall, they started to close down their bases. So they shut down 26 American military bases in the USA, and now they have only left one, the Pituffik airspace, which is a center point in the Arctic defense. So what we do not quite understand is, what is it they want more? We understand that Donald Trump, he has a feeling that owning the Greenland is feeling different. But I mean, those are personal emotions. This is not an agreement. This is not how you can establish an international order.
But when it comes to pragmatic idealism, what can be done? Because if Denmark is pragmatically idealistic, Trump is emotional. So if he tries to send troops to to Greenland, nothing is impossible, as we can see. What do you think would be the reaction?
Yeah, and now I can actually now reveal what is the top story in Denmark exactly this morning, because our national radio and TV station, Danmarks Radio, they revealed that in January we were presented with the news that Denmark was sending, together with some allied countries, were sending soldiers to January in an exercise. But what they now reveal in the Danish and I only have their words for it, because it's really fresh news. What they have revealed is actually they were prepared to destroy air bases or landing stations, airports in Greenland, in the case that they saw USA was going to attack Greenland militarily or try to take it over by military force. So we were actually, according to that news, ready to fight for Greenland. I mean, this is really dramatic and would be, of course, completely destroying any concept of NATO alliance and whatever we had. So this is actually where we are. Very dramatic. At the same time, Denmark is, we have been to the White House to understand what is going on here. What is it the Americans need? And I'm sure that Denmark will, and Greenland would really move fast, very far, in order to avoid any more conflict about this. But it's really difficult for the Danish government to negotiate with a feeling.
So in the past 5 years, Denmark has moved from EU skeptic country to a country that now wants to be among the heavyweights of the EU.
Yeah, and actually, it was like Mette Frederiksen. She has gone through a transition here. Only a few years ago, she was talking about there should never be any. Not even a piece of paper between America and Denmark. And during this election campaign, just like 1 week ago, she was saying USA is still the most important ally for Denmark, of course, but it is not the closest ally for Denmark anymore. And that is rather wild when you think about it. This shows that we do not believe in USA as we did before. And we are now preparing for a future where this is not only a function of Donald Trump being the president, but this might be an everlasting trait of American policy that we had to find a new balance. So Denmark has actually switched much more towards the European dimension. And at latest, we have also seen that we are switching a bit more inside that concept towards cooperation among the Nordic countries. Which would be much easier for many reasons. Still, though, we are not part of the same NATO circle when it comes to defense. Denmark is part of the Northern European circle, and our Nordic partners are part of the Arctic circle. But this is something you can work along.
Okay, we have some questions in the chat. Blanca Blay from the daily newspaper The Standard. I'll read all and then we can distribute them. There are not many undecided voters in the polls and have been before other elections. Why is that and what impact does that have? Would the foreign policy change under Prime Minister Poulsen? So this is the first set of questions. First Rune and then you, Michael.
Yeah, well, it is true that some analyses point out that there are fewer undecided voters in this campaign than in other campaigns, but still, on a direct question, I was shown earlier this week that 27% of the voters still say that they are in doubt to some extent. My explanation for if there is fewer undecided voters, then it would be exactly what we talked about, namely this disappointment among a lot of social democratic voters that has driven them away from the party and they're not really keen on coming back. That, and then we should also note that in the last election, we had two new parties that did really well, the Moderate Party and the Denmark Democrats. And there may have been, and I think there was a lot of more uncertainty surrounding these two parties in that election than in the current election. So that may also be a reason why the share of undecided voters isn't as high as it was the last time around. But it is a bit of an open question, and we're only seeing it, I think, consistently from one polling company. So there may be also some methodological artifacts surrounding it. I wouldn't expect foreign policy to change if Troels Poulsen were to become prime minister, but maybe Michael will have a different perspective.
No, I absolutely do agree. I don't expect it to change. I mean, the main priorities are still Ukraine and internally Greenland, and then it will be a focus on how we can build out the European vision. You could say that by now it has been easier to navigate for Danish politicians in this area, because they haven't really prioritized yet, because whenever they needed some more money, they found some more money in empty boxes or in full boxes. They appear to be full boxes. So they have not been forced into heavy priorities, because at a time you will see an opposing interest in the Danish welfare state and in the defense expenditures. We saw a small sign of it during the municipality elections in the autumn, where you saw some of the social democratic mayors were complaining that we were maybe spending too much money on Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees. But it's really not, I mean, this is not the driving force in Danish politics right now. So I completely agree. I don't foresee any major changes.
So my name is Christoph Zott. I work for the Austrian daily newspaper, Die Presse. And I would like to ask about social democracy in Denmark and Mette Frederiksen. In Europe, especially in Austria, she is perceived as some kind of protection space for social democrats regarding the migration question, which means like she's conceived as somebody that has found a solution, being a social democrat and being hard on migration and being successful with that. And I was wondering, are the Danish social democrats aware of this kind of perception? Are they playing into it? And also, how is the party dealing with this migration stance? Is there a huge debate, or are they unified behind her? Thank you.
Thank you.
I can talk to that. I forgot all of your questions, but to take the last one first, the party seems to be unified. At least we don't hear any internal discussions about this. And I think as long as they keep winning, if not the election, then the power, then I think the party will be united behind her. Also because I believe this strategy is effective, in the sense that they are attracting the type of working class voters that are interested in this more restrictive immigration policy, combined with a leftist redistribution policy, like the one that they're now proposing, particularly on the pension system. That was what gave them government power back in 2019 when they first took office. And it's that line that they've more or less adhered to since, with the exception of the current government coalition, where they've, as we discussed, turned in the eyes of a lot of their voters too far to the right on the economy. But the voters that disliked their position on immigration, they left the party already in 2019 or 22. But so the question of how much you can sort of project the Danish case to other countries, I think, to me at least, has two levels. I think at the structural level, I'm pretty convinced that in most West European countries, you find the same configuration of a traditional working class group of voters that have this set of preferences, i.e. they want restrictive immigration policies and they want left-wing policies on the economy. And it is clear that social democratic parties, as part of the ideas of the third way that were popular from New Labour in the 1990s, and also you've seen in other European countries, social democratic parties have actually left these voters behind to some extent. And then they've started moving to other parties, because if they didn't feel that they could get what they wanted from the Social Democrats, then they could just as well vote for other parties. So if a party wants to attract these voters, then in my view, you have to offer the policies that they want. And these are probably roughly the same across different Western European countries. Where the things then may differ is at the level of the parties. Because what has been the reason why this has been a viable strategy for the Danish Social Democrats is that the voters that they lost as part of this strategy, i.e. voters that don't agree and don't want this more restrictive immigration policy, they have left to parties, other left-wing parties that still end up supporting a social democratic government. So they could afford, in that sense, to alienate some of their more left-wing voters on the immigration issue, because they just left for other parties that still ended up pointing to the Social Democrats when it came to forming a government. And if that situation is different in other countries, then the strategy will not work, because if these voters that leave the party as part of such a transformation, if they change to other parties that will not end up supporting a social democratic prime minister, well, then you have a different situation, basically. So it is to some extent dependent on the party system being configured in such a way, and I mean the sort of configuration we have traditionally in Denmark is this two-block system, a red and a blue block facing off and just about equally sized. So if you have that type of system and voters that leave the Social Democrats if they move to the right on immigration, if they just move to other left-wing parties that still point to Social Democrats, then it can be a winning strategy. But if they move to other parties that don't point to a Social Democrat, then it may well not be a winning strategy, even though it may be successful with these working class voters. So it's dependent in that sense on the setup. I think that was at least to your question. Michael has a contribution.
Yeah, and then I completely share what you're saying. Just a question: if we know that the Social Democrats are not typical in a European context, people are completely aware of that. But if they look into German SPD, for example, they don't see that they are following a line which is equal to electoral victory. So they haven't been proved against in other parts of Europe. On the contrary, what they see is actually this is more of a winning strategy than what they see in the rest of Europe. I discussed this very much with my wife, who's from Austria, who has been shocked by the Danish Social Democrats, how they are talking, because sometimes to her it appears to be more like FPÖ than the SPÖ. But this is also true when it comes to migration. They really took over a lot of the agenda from the right-wing parties.
Well, I will read the next question from the chat, but it is certainly difficult to envisage that the Danish Social Democrats are in the same group as the Spanish socialists. It just they have very, very different policies. Well, let me read. Oscar Gelis, freelance journalist for Spanish news outlets, and the question is about the blue bloc prospects to form a majority. The blue bloc includes multiple parties that are very different one from another. Do you see cooperation to form a government as realistic? Which policy areas could prove most contentious, and who is likely to emerge as prime minister? I guess it would be for Rune or...
Well, at least I can start. Well, the polls don't show this as a realistic opportunity, in the sense that the most polls either have a red-wing, very narrow red-wing majority, or put the moderate party, the party of the former Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, as the pivotal party between the two blocs. And there seems to be bad blood between the moderates and Lars Løkke Rasmussen and at least the parties on the far right, particularly the Danish People's Party, have said that they will not support any form of government that has Lars Løkke Rasmussen as a minister in it, de facto ruling out cooperation with this party. And that, I think, dramatically reduces the possibilities that they have, because this has been such a clear stance from the Danish People's Party that I really cannot see them going back on it, even in negotiations after the election. That would really be damaging to them. So I don't think this would be possible. Also, most likely such a blue majority would involve a new party that's running for the first time, the Citizens Party, which is an unknown creature in the sense that they have a very sort of unclear policy platform that maybe points in different directions, but their main point or the linchpin, if you will, of their appeal is actually a high degree of distrust in the political system and the traditional politicians. So they seem, I would say, as a a bit of a wild card if you were to base a majority on this party. Also, they're likely to get maybe between 4 and 6 members of parliament. Likely only one of them has been elected before, and the others will be unknown, untested, new people. And maybe they will at some point decide that they want to go their own way, which would then potentially undercut a majority. So this would be a risky business, I think. In terms of policy disagreement, well, I think they might actually be able to agree on most things, depending on how insisting the different parties would be. And currently, the Danish People's Party seem to be the most insisting with this idea of net Muslim migration, because they're saying that this is an ultimate demand for their support for any government. And it's unclear how it would happen, as I said, and of course we have freedom of religion in Denmark, so it is legal, and most parties still want it to be legal to be Muslim, and that cannot be just being a Muslim cannot be a reason for expelling people from the country. So they still owe an answer as to how they want this to come about. But I mean, on the other hand, the other right-wing parties, including the Liberal Party led by Troels Lund Poulsen, which seems to be the main contender for as a right-wing prime minister, if it were to be possible, they are saying, well, we will work towards this goal while maintaining freedom of religion and also adhering mostly to international conventions. I think that's also potentially a sticking point, in the sense that the Danish People's Party is clear. They want to withdraw Denmark from international conventions that prevent us from expelling foreigners to a larger extent, whereas at least so far, well, the Liberals want to leave this convention on citizenship, but not yet the European Convention of Human Rights, which is in effect the main convention preventing more people from being expelled from the country.
Excuse
and if
me.
I can add one thing here, a new aspect of this maybe is we could end up in a situation where the Danish parties are very dependent on what is going on in Greenland and in Faroe Islands. In the Danish parliament, we have 179 members. 2 of them comes from Greenland, 2 of them comes from the Faroe Island. What has happened in Greenland in the latest days is actually that the big social democratic party, Siumut, has been splintered. And if they will be decisive, though votes coming from Greenland and Faroe Island, then they will actually play into a new realism about a changing kingdom, a changing relation inside the kingdom. Denmark has to accept that Greenland and Faroe Island are talking with a bigger voice than before, and they would also like to get some results from cooperating with an upcoming government. So I think that, but maybe you can add something to that, Rune. But I think the mechanics in relation to especially Greenland and Denmark, the dynamics could actually be changed a bit. Because of all the fuss about Greenland. How it will spill out, I do not know, because I frankly speaking, I've been following politics in Greenland for many years. I cannot completely see what is going on right now in the biggest Siumut party.
I just read, Michael, regarding Greenland. Martin Braun, the well-known Danish journalist, wrote on Facebook that that the educational level in Greenland is very low, and probably one of the reasons why half of the population has only the basic education is because they do not speak good enough Danish. And I assume that the focus was on Greenlandic language. And more people are opting for English rather than Danish. So to what extent is this shift, also political shift, or a shift in the mindset? Would you agree with this?
I think there is a changing mindset here. It's very difficult to really weigh one thing up against another thing, because what happened with USA and Donald Trump has been a truly shock to a lot of people in Greenland. And I believe that people who was so convinced they should gain independence as soon as possible, they have stopped up and say, hey, this is what we want. This is the end station, but maybe the process should be a bit different. But of course, you would also have some people who can see some advantages in being more oriented towards America. But my overall impression right now is Greenland has got a shock, and they are more susceptible to work with Denmark than with the USA.
Thank you. Rune, I would just, if there are no questions, and I will, I don't see questions, I have many. Rune, when we spoke in preparation of this event, you were mentioning that there were even suggestions that people or that foreigners or migrants who already have Danish citizenship, maybe it should be reviewed. They were even, how far has this proposal gone? And related also to foreigners and migrants, the parties that are to the left of Social Democrats, what do they propose regarding migration? Or like there is a consensus about foreign policy, there is also a consensus, or more or less consensus, about migration.
Well, to take the latter part first, they're not basically proposing anything, not very loudly as well, at least, because I think they realize that there is a huge majority against relaxing the current policy line. And they know that if they start discussing and suggesting and working for their perspective on this, this may well tip the boat and drive voters away into the blue bloc. And therefore,
Excuse me, you mean if there are some pro-migration policies? You're referring to that?
Yes, yes,
okay.
Yes. So I think that they would want policies to change, but that they realize that this is not going to happen. And therefore, they don't really talk about it. Perhaps then hoping that some of the suggestions from the right will be so dramatic that they will illustrate to voters that, well, what are the actual implications of this? The idea of reviewing citizenships, I think, was launched by the Danish People's Party. And so far, it hasn't made any progress, and I don't think it's likely that this will come through Parliament. But it's one of the things that they might start to work for if there were to be a right-wing majority, which does not seem to be likely. So in that sense, it's I mean, I see it as one of their proposals for what they would like to do, but that has not yet been taken over by other parties. And I don't know, I don't think it's that likely that this particular proposal would be taken over. What I think is more likely is that there will be even further tightenings of the rules surrounding how to get Danish citizenship. And what they're discussing there is an idea to have some form of screening of people to find out if they have, quote unquote, undemocratic or non-Danish attitudes or values. What then exactly what democratic values is, and not to mention Danish values, is fairly open, I would say. And so it's difficult. Also, how can you find out if people have these ideas? If you have an interview, then people can lie to the interviewer. So there are discussions about this. But just to put it in perspective, the rules surrounding citizenship are such, and that's mandated in the Constitution, that Parliament has to rule to vote on a citizenship. You can only get citizenship through an act of as a part of a law. So I think every 6 months or so, Parliament votes on a list of specific names, whether they should get Danish citizenship or not. And this is handled in a specific, the sort of lead up to this work is handled by a specific committee in the Parliament, where they actually sit and discuss, in some cases, individual persons. And sometimes members of this committee get information from who knows, that will point out that this or that person said this or that, maybe some 5, I don't know, many years ago on Facebook. And you can look here, maybe there's a screen dump. So do you really think that this person should get citizenship? And in some cases, the answer is no. And they have taken persons away from this law on the basis of this type of thing, arguing that, well, this person has clearly shown that he or she does not have democratic or Danish values, so we don't want to give them citizenship. So that is already happening. And they want to maybe formalize that a bit more so that they could potentially, well, I think they would want to catch more people who don't have democratic values by their standards.
Well, my last question is rather the reflection of my confusion. And the confusion is when the Prime Minister of Hungary, there are also important elections in Hungary, says the things you have just explained. We call them illiberal democracy. We say it is far right and it is not European. When the Danes say the same thing, no one questions that. So where are we in Europe?
It's a good question. Certainly, there is also in Denmark discussions about how far can you go in this area while still staying within the confines of a constitution that mandates, as I said, freedom of religion, freedom of expression also. But then we still have this this peculiarity, I guess, with respect to how to get Danish citizenship, that should happen through an act of parliament. And that means that it is a political matter in that sense, according to the constitution, which at least some politicians are using to say, well, therefore it's completely legal, or intended, that's the way it should be. But I think it's for others, potentially with a different and non-Danish perspective, to sort of place it in comparison.
I wasn't referring only to, I'll let you reply, Michael, of course. I wasn't referring only to citizenship. I was referring to to denominating people, to even saying we don't want Muslims, etc. When Hungarians say that, or not Hungarians, Viktor Orban says that, it's a shock. When the Danes said, well, it's a happy, democratic northern country. Please, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, but I think, in Denmark, we also have a discussion, how can you formulate that? This is part of the debate. How far can you go in talking about people like some of the right-wing parties are doing it? But I think a very big difference between Denmark and Hungary is that there's a basic agreement that we have to act within all international conventions, and what we are doing is we are sometimes talking about, should the way we are interpreting those conventions, should they be updated somehow? And there you see a very peculiar alliance between the Danish Prime Minister, Social Democratic Minister Mette Frederiksen, and Italy's Prime Minister Meloni. They're actually working closely together in this. But it is within the concept of a rule-based order. It is just because, and I do not argue in favor of this, I have to stress that, but it is, at least it is within the concept of a convention, and how much can we update those conventions without abolishing them. Then there will be on the far right, there will be votes and voices who are actually arguing that we should simply explode them and so on. But this is not the main driver in Danish politics by now. I completely understand your question, by the way.
Well, I do thank you, Rune. I thank you, Michael. This was really a great introduction to the pre-election time, and an excellent explanation of the context of the Danish way of thinking. And I do hope we shall continue this discussion after the elections. And I assume that whoever wins the elections, we shall not have radical policy changes. So what you have just said, this will continue the trend. And I loved what you mentioned about updating the conventions. We go to the beginning where I said that Denmark is a trendsetter. I thank you so much. And thanks to the audience. Thank you.